Welcome everyone. Greetings. Happy June 8th or somewhere thereabouts, depending on where you are at. It's terrific to have you here today. My name is Andrea Brockmeyer, and I will be with you here in our certification chat today. I'm the Director of Project Management at Watermark Learning, and I develop and deliver certification courses in PMP, PBA, ACP, and have been doing that for a long time. I am involved in the development of all of the resources that we use in certification for those particular certifications. So it's just great to be with you here today. We've got some upcoming classes there you can see for our certifications, and be aware that we do our certification courses live online. We also do them live face-to-face. We can come to your organization to do that as well, and we also have our anytime learning options for self-directed learning at your own pace. So lots of options for you there. You will get a copy of these slides at the end of our session today, so that will be coming to you. You also will have a special offer for folks that show up today as a thanks for participating, so be aware that you'll get some discounts for some of the resources that we have. So here is just a page that I like to include. It's got a lot of links, and so you may want to refer back to this for some things that you may want to check out, just as kind of a handy resource page for you there. So here are the things that I was thinking of talking about today. There is one date that people are interested in as it relates to PMI certifications. So I wanted to talk about that. I would like to talk just a little bit about how PMI develops their exams. I think that's a helpful thing for people to be aware of, and it can help provide a little context for what to expect when there is an exam update from PMI. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about the PMI-PBA exam and just talk about a couple of the resources that, the PMI resources for that exam. And then I always like to share certification numbers. I just kind of like tracking those numbers, and I like to share those with folks. And then I've got some study tips that I wanted to pass on. However, if there are things that you want to know about, please go ahead and put them in the question box, and I will be happy to take any questions you've got at any point. And this really needs to be about what you need to know or have questions about. So feel free to chime in at any point there. So in terms of exam dates, it's been a busy year at PMI. So these certification chats have been interesting this year because there's just been a lot going on. We're down to one date left. We've got June 25th coming up, which is the date that the updated PGMP, the Program Management Professional exam, will be updated, which there aren't too many folks that do that. It's a pretty elite group there. But the PBA is changing on June 25th too. And of course, PBAs are elite as well, but there are a few more of them. And so that's the date that we have left that is on a lot of folks, the radar of a lot of folks. So that's coming up here in a couple of weeks. So other than that, we've got everything else. Once we're past that, then it's going to be presumably a quiet year as it relates to certifications from PMI. So I want to talk just a little bit about how does PMI develop their exams, what goes into that, because I think sometimes people have a misconception about what it means when there's going to be an exam update. So the first thing to know is that PMI's certifications are not based on books. They are not based on the standards that they write. They are role-based exams. What that means, it's not a book test, okay? What the exception to that is the CAPM, the Certified Associate in Project Management, which is in fact a test specifically on the PMBOK guide. But other than that, the PMP, the PBA, the ACP, the PGMP, all of those, they're not based on a book. They're based on what people do in those roles. The way they develop their exams is they start with what's called a role delineation study. And this isn't going to take real long. I know this sounds like it's going to take forever. It isn't going to take real long here. But it's important to understand that the first thing that drives the development of a PMI exam is a role delineation study. And what they do is they put together a task force of people that go out into the field and they look at what people do in the field. What do project managers do in their role? What do BAs working in the context of projects, what do they do in their role? What do agile practitioners do? And they take a look at, different industries and different kinds of environments to see what people are doing in those roles. And they do this every few years because, of course, what people were doing as project managers 10 years ago is different than what they do today, or 20 years ago, or 5 years ago. It evolves. So they send people periodically and they come up with this role delineation study. From that role delineation study, then, they develop what's called the Exam Content Outline, or the ECO. And they take those observations and they put them into these sort of categories, and they identify the key tasks that people do within those domains or categories. For example, needs assessment, planning, analysis, or initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling. What are the things that people are doing in those domains? That is the blueprint for the exam. That is what the basis for the exam. So when they write test questions, they have to map back to those tasks in that ECO. They're testing on what it is that people are doing in that role as it's organized in the ECO. Okay, so when they do a new role delineation study, that results in an updated exam content outline. Then the last thing they do is they take a look at the current PMI guides and standards, such as the PMBOK guide, or the Guide to Business Analysis, or the practice guides of various flavors. And they make sure that their test questions are consistent with the language in those particular standards. Now, of course, those standards get updated every 4 or 5 years as well. So you've got a number of moving parts here, but the guides and the standards are used to confirm that the language is consistent. That is then what results in the exam. So what you can see is that the biggest driver, the most fundamental change on an exam is going to be when they update that role delineation study and the resulting exam content outline. When there is an update to, say, the PMBOK guide, for example, that implication for the exam is simply going to be as it relates to language consistency. Okay. So I say that because people, when there's a new, say the PMBOK guide gets updated, people think that the whole exam is going to be completely rewritten. It's actually not. It gets rewritten when there's a role delineation study update. All right. So if you have any questions, go ahead and shout them out. I'll answer them here. So at any rate, so this little graph here is a little simpler than it was even a few months ago because we're down to one change here. I don't have the PGMP stuff on here because most people are interested in these. These are the top certifications that most people are interested in. So PMP, we're done there. If you're getting ready to prep for your PMP, you want to get that exam content outline, and the ECOs for every certification are on the PMI website. They're free. You definitely want to use those. And then the PMBOK 6th Ed and our Watermark course materials, which are going to be updated, and we will have those. We've got a course coming up in August. Then the ACP, I'm going to jump over there. If you're getting ready for the ACP, you want to take a look at that ECO, the PMI Agile Practice Guide, and our current course materials. CAPM, they do have actually a new ECO. Why? Because as I mentioned, it's a book-based exam. It's based on the PMBOK. The PMBOK was just updated, so their ECO gets updated. So you've got current stuff there. Now, if you're in the middle of your PBA journey and you are planning to take your test before June 25th, I would assume you have a date scheduled already for your test. I don't know if, depending on where you are, it might be hard to find a seat at this point. But anybody testing before June 25th, you're going to want to get the ECO, our online study exam, our study guide, the PMI practice guide, our course materials, and the PMBOK. Now, if you're planning on taking the PBA after June 25th, you're going to use that ECO, and that hasn't changed. Our Watermark online study exam, which will be updated by that time. The Watermark study guide, which will be updated. It won't be ready June 25th. It should be ready second, possibly early third quarter. And also the PMI Guide to Business Analysis, a new source from last year, end of last year. And then our Watermark course materials, which will be ready for our PBA Prep course in October. And then the PMBOK guide, and I just say there as necessary. So right now, the PMBOK guide is kind of a more highlighted as a resource for the PBA. But now that they've come out with their Guide to Business Analysis, the PMBOK guide really is much less critical as a resource. And I say as necessary because if you are really unfamiliar with what PMs do, or some of the project language is really foreign to you, you might want to take a look at it. But it's not something I would spend as much time with if you are planning to test after June 25th. Okay, any questions or anything about that? All right. So here are the key sources, the PMI sources, if you are planning to take the PBA. And actually, can I see hands? How many people are interested in or pursuing their PMP out there? Let me see if I can. Okay. All right, I'll put hands down on that. A couple hands. Any others on the PMP? Anybody? Hands up, if you can see. Okay. All right. How about PBA? How many people are interested in the PBA? Okay. How about the ACP? Anybody interested in the ACP? Okay. And how about CAPM? Okay. And how many don't really know? How many are just exploring in general? Okay. So a little bit of everything. Doesn't look like too many interested in the ACP at the, here today, but okay. Well, the PBA, there's just increasing interest in this, and so here are the key sources for this. So the Guide to Business Analysis and the Practice Guide, the BA Practice Guide. So PMI's Guide to Business Analysis came out in November of last year. And this document is to business analysis what the PMBOK is to project managers. So you've got processes, you've got knowledge areas and process groups. So it reads very similarly to the PMBOK if you are familiar with the PMBOK. So it's it's organized the same and very, very similar in terms of format. And then the practice guide, the BA practice guide, is how to use the tools. It's more of what it says it is. It's a practice guide. It's telling you how to do these things. It's very practical. It's a very usable document, and it complements the guide. Now I put complements in quotes there because that's PMI's term. They say it complements the guide. And there are references in the in the guide to business analysis to the practice guide. So for example, in the guide to business analysis, they will talk about a process and they'll talk about tools and techniques, and they'll have a little bit about a tool. Let's say root cause analysis, and then they'll say, see the practice guide for more details on how to use this. However, they don't exactly mirror each other in terms of domains or sort of overall organization exactly. So they're not going to mirror each other. So don't look for them to be exactly 100% organized the same, but they go pretty well together. And I would say they're really good documents. The practice guide in particular, I think, is really easy to read and understand. What I like about both of them is they have collaboration points, and they talk about how do BAs and PMs and DevOps or sponsors, how are those people involved in these various processes? And so I really find that to be enormously helpful and makes it very usable. So I have found these to be really great documents. I think the PBA as well, if there are any of you out there who are already PMP certified or you're a project manager, I think the PBA is an awesome certification. And I think there are many, many PMs out there, many PMPs out there who are doing business analysis as part of their jobs and maybe don't recognize it because you've just always done it and you haven't had much exposure to some of the best practices in business analysis. But just studying this stuff is so enormously helpful in terms of defining when am I functioning and operating as a project manager, when am I functioning and operating as a business analyst. And it just really helps delineate those roles and the activities that you're doing in them. In addition, if you find yourself working with a BA, you're going to be so much more effective as a project manager if you understand what that BA is doing, how you can help them sometimes when you might be doing some of that business analysis work. So I am really have always been an advocate of this, but I think becoming even more so an advocate for project managers really exploring business analysis and pursuing the PBA because I think it really helps you be better as a project manager, frankly. And it certainly makes you more effective when you are functioning as a business analysis. It's much the same when you have team members who maybe they're working on projects, but they're not project managers. When they get some exposure to project management best practice, that makes them more effective because they understand what's expected of that project manager. Sort of the same kind of thing. So I think these are great resources. I think the test is really a great. The effort that you put into this certification really helps you be a better professional on projects in general. In addition, if your organization is doing agile or moving in that direction, the work that BAs do, business analysis work, I mean, there are places for project managers and BAs in agile environments for sure, but some of the BA activities and tasks and processes and tools in particular translate, I think, sometimes even more so into an agile environment. So I think from that standpoint, it's wise for folks who have been in project management to really think about, okay, what are the business analysis kinds of things that I've been doing? And might this certification help me tune up my understanding of those things so that I can be more effective in my environment now, and as we're moving into Agile, have some things that translate a little more directly into that environment. So the PMBOK then, switching gears here, just a couple of highlights about some of the changes with the PMBOK 6th Ed. And so this was released at the end of March. So it's been out for a while. It doesn't feel so new anymore. I think there's so much anticipation around it that by the time it gets here, it seems like it's already been here a long time. But just some comments about the PMBOK. One thing that I will say is that it's not a very easy document to read. For one thing, it's like 730 some pages or something like that. It's really long. And the pages are gray, which makes them very hard to read. And that's unfortunate. But the reason they did that is it's to protect their IP. It's if you make photocopies of the pages, there's, do not copy shows up all over the page. So they've done that in order to protect their IP. Unfortunately, it doesn't make it very easy to read. Having said that, some of the changes that they've made, I think, are nice. And what they've done is they have included at the beginning of each chapter or knowledge area 3 sections. These aren't necessarily things that weren't included in previous versions or editions, but it's a little more organized. So one of the things that they've done is they've included trends and emerging practices. So some of the things that are happening as it relates to cost management or procurement management or schedule management, what are the things that people are doing out, some trends out there. So, for example, with HR management or resource management, the idea of self-organizing teams and just the way you orient towards a team, that's a change that's going on that they're seeing. That as it relates to procurement management, really big projects with like billions of dollars in contracts, multiple contractors, having international standards for your contracts, things like that. Stakeholder management is kind of almost a theme, I think, as well. And that is that, there's a wider view of who stakeholders are and involving everybody in the effort to engage stakeholders. It's not just the project manager's job to engage stakeholders, but all the team members need to be doing that. So those are just some of the examples of the kinds of things at the beginning of each section. They'll have some trends and emerging practices, and it may be just a few paragraphs. It's not a real long section. The other thing they've done is they've included tailoring considerations. So things like, what about the development approach? Are you doing agile? Is this going to be waterfall? Is this going to be kind of a combo? Or things like how certain are people about what they think they want? So how stable are those requirements? What about project complexity? How important is this project? What's the priority of this project? What are the things as it relates to, again, at the beginning of each section, what are the things pertaining to scope management or risk management or quality management that may inspire you to tailor how you apply the processes in this section? So that's another section at the beginning of each chapter or section. And then specifically considerations for adaptive and agile environments. So, what about uncertainty? What about chunking work or thinking about breaking the work down? Transparency, working collaboratively with stakeholders. Things to think about, again, as it relates to the processes in each section. So one of the questions, the Agile Practice Guide bundles with the PMBOK 6th Ed. So people say, well, do I have to read that in order to take the PMP, for example? The PMP exam isn't going to test you on everything in the Agile Practice Guide because they have an Agile certification. So I would say that everything you need to know is pretty much captured in those, considerations for Agile and adaptive environments section at the beginning of each section. So I think the Agile Practice Guide is a great document, however, and it's not very long. It's a really good read. I would recommend reading it no matter who you are and where you are, just because that's what everybody's talking about. But you don't need to spend a lot of time with that in order to prepare for the PMP. Also, when reading the PMBOK, just be aware that there are a number of appendices in the back that are very helpful. There's also the standard in the back. So the beginning of the PMBOK is the guide, which includes all the details around all the tools. The standard in the back has the processes organized by process group, and then it doesn't go into all the details around the tools. So that can actually be a good place to start. if you want to break it down a little bit, because like I say, the PMBOK is like, 700 and some pages. It's a little daunting when you look at it. So take a few minutes to look at how it's organized, and maybe start with some of those, with the standard and some of the appendices, and then go back and look at all the detail in the front end. All right, and then certification growth. I just like to track these numbers. I think it's interesting to see what's going on. And it's good to see the numbers keep growing. I think certification is a very wise investment of time, energy, and money. The certification itself is not going to make you a great project manager or a business analyst or agile practitioner. Kind of like having an MD doesn't make you a good doctor. But the process of getting certified refines your understanding of a discipline. It forces you to sit down and figure out really what does good practice look like. And only when you recognize that are you really able to figure out how to tailor it and to make it work for you. Otherwise, you're just kind of guessing. And it makes it much more difficult to work with others and really effectively collaborate if you aren't sure you're all talking about the same thing. So I really am a huge advocate. I have found every time I pursue a certification that I learn so much. To be sure, you have to have experience in order to get certified, but you really refine your understanding based on that experience when you work with those standards in that discipline. Nowhere does it say you have to do things exactly as it says in those standards, and those standards even say that. This isn't about memorizing 700 pages of a project management body of knowledge and thinking you're going to apply all of that on every project. Nobody does, and nobody should. That wouldn't even be good practice. But it really does help you understand what are some of the things that I should have in my toolkit and how might I use them, or how could I best modify them to make them work for me. So that's just my personal plug there for certification. At any rate, so here's what we've got, and you can see that we've got. I mean, we're coming up to, we're getting almost to 900,000 PMPs in the world, and they it continues to grow. So this calendar year, this is to the end of April to just to the beginning of May, it's grown by 5%. So year over year, 2017 to 2018, they had 11% growth. I think the ones that are particularly interesting and that I've been watching are the ACP and the PBA. So you can see that the PBA continues to be, in terms of the rate of growth, the fastest growing, or the highest growth in terms of rate of growth of PMI certifications. And I think that's going to continue. We just continue to get a lot of inquiries about this. I've gotten feedback, a lot of feedback recently about folks that have taken our class and passed and done very well, and have found it very helpful. And the ACP as well. I mean, that's, we're looking at 22,000 ACPs, and that number continues to grow as well. So I think those are that growth is going to be sustained for both of those throughout the year, and going forward, actually. So I just like to share those. All right, then what is more fun than studying for a PMI exam? Pop quiz here. Any guesses? Everything is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. Laundry is more fun than studying for a PMI exam. So if this is something that you are thinking about pursuing, it is my recommendation that you figure out how to do a little something every day, because everything is a distractor and it's so easy to get taken off track. And if you let one day go by without doing something, then another day goes by, and then another day, and then it gets away from you. So even if it's just spending 5 minutes with flashcards, just do not let a day go by until you get it done. Carve out 2 or 3 months or whatever you're going to take to get this done, and do a little something every day, 7 days a week, every 24-hour period, one thing for each little box on the calendar. because I just, I have students who say, I was working on it and then this happened and this happened, and it's so easy to let it get away. So um, that's my suggestion. All right. So the top PMI certification prep tips are to, if you didn't catch it just a minute ago, do some kind of prep every day. That's number one. Secondly, plan to commit at least 40 hours at a minimum to prepping, and that's 40 hours after taking a boot camp or some kind of a class, whether it's anytime learning or online or whatever. But and of course everybody's different, but it's not a small investment of time. You need to spend as much time as necessary to pass. You're not going to get an A or a B or something like that. It's going to be a pass or fail. But you need to spend, it's a significant chunk of time. So I would say at least 40. Some people say 100 hours. I don't think, probably 100 hours maybe, but it's a lot. There is a point of diminishing return, I think, is my comment on 100 hours. You need enough to pass, but yeah. And then read the PMBOK guide or the practice guide or any of, the guide to business analysis, whatever the key standards are. Read those at least once. Now, I know people who say, I didn't even read that thing. I don't know too many people have said that, but I personally would not recommend that. I think you need to read them to be familiar with the language and to understand how they organize things. And you'll just find that to be very helpful. And the language is a big piece of it. That's one of the biggest obstacles. You're going to recognize, oh, we do that, or I do that, or I've been doing that for a long time. I just didn't call it that. So that those standards are really going to help you so that when you go into the exam, you recognize the language. And I just got an email within the last 48 hours from somebody, hey, I passed my PBA, thank you. And it was super helpful, to read those things to get so that the language was familiar. Supplement your study with our study guide for the PBA. And again, we're going to be updating that soon. Come up with different ways of approaching things. You can take one domain or knowledge at a time, knowledge area at a time, kind of slice and dice it a little different way each time you study, and then do drills in those areas with our online study exam. So don't always take it, the whole thing. Kind of just break it down in different ways and then do drills. Use our flashcards. We've got flashcards as different resources and some of our different materials, or create flashcards. Actually, one of my favorite ways of studying is to go get inexpensive recipe cards at the drugstore and little note cards and just create flashcards as you're studying. Write down a term and on the back write the definition and test yourself, or draw out an example of a model and write on the back what it is and how you'd use it. Your brain does something different when you're writing something down than when you're reading or speaking or listening. After reading all of the resources, practice doing simulations or mix of questions. So with our online study exam, you can mix up the questions from multiple, domains or knowledge areas. You can also do simulations. So you can do, a 200 question simulation. And I just got an email from somebody else a couple weeks ago, who was saying she found that helpful because it had been a very long time since she'd taken a 4-hour exam. So if you're looking, for example, at the PMP or the PBA, that's 4 hours for an exam. You don't have to take all 4 hours, but most people are going to take, most of that. That's a long time. And if it's been a while since you've done something like that, it's amazing how taxing it is. So you might, do the simulation. Now, I will also say that I remember it being very difficult to find that amount of time to do a full simulation. So I did shorter tests. That worked for me. But, that simulation can be helpful just to get a sense of what it's like to actually read through that many questions. It can be exhausting. Keep studying until you get well into the 80% on practice tests. So you want to, be really solid on those practice tests before you go in. And then there's, you get an opportunity, oh, you don't get an opportunity, you take an opportunity, you make an opportunity to do a brain dump when your exam starts. So when you go to take your test, when at the very beginning of the test, once it starts, you will have scratch paper or a whiteboard, and you can jot things down that you want, that you've kind of committed to memory, that you want to get into writing to just to reference, or just to kind of calm yourself down, or just to remind yourself that, hey, I know this stuff. So figure out, make a decision about what's going to be in my brain dump and practice that before you go in. And try to get rest before you go. So a rested brain is a test-ready brain. So that's what I've got. And anything else, folks? Any questions? Anybody have questions at all about anything I've talked about, or something that you were hoping to find out that I didn't answer? I'd be happy to tell you what might be helpful. Anybody? Okay. All right. Well, good luck to all of you. If something occurs to you after you hang up here, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to help you out and answer any questions that you have. And as people get back to your day, I'll hang around until the last person leaves. Okay, the brain dump thing. Somebody's asking about the brain dump. Okay, so in the exam, when you sit down to take your test, you go to a site, a Prometric site, a place where that's what they do. They're commissioned to proctor exams, and you're going to sit down. And prior to your exam, there is a demo, or sort of a little practice, just to give you an opportunity to practice how you mark a question or how you answer a question, and it just goes through, and so that you understand kind of how the testing thing works. So you finish that, and you get like 15 minutes for that, I think. So then you finish that, and then your exam starts. And so it'll be, question number 1. Well, when your exam starts, you can do what's called a brain dump. And the brain dump is what people do. They commit something to memory. So for example, for people studying for the PMP, they will commit all the processes, knowledge areas, process groups, maybe key equations that they want to remember. And you'll just take a minute and you'll write that down on the scratch paper that they give you, or on the whiteboard that they give you. Hopefully with a PMP and the PBA, hopefully you get scratch paper, you get a little more space, but you can just write that stuff down. You can't do that until the exam starts. And you can't take anything with you into the exam. You can't even take your own tissue. You can't take a watch. You can't take anything. Security they will check you. They will wand you. They will, it's like going through the airport security. You can't take anything with you. So they'll give you scratch paper and pencils, or a whiteboard and marker and eraser. And so you just take a minute and you purge all of that stuff that you've committed to memory onto your scratch paper or whiteboard. That's called a brain dump. And then you can refer back to that if you need it during the exam. So the purpose of that is presumably that you've got, maybe there's a question about something, then you can look at your brain dump and you don't have to try to remember what that is. But really, I think for me, my experience has been that the purpose of that is also to kind of calm yourself down. I can be kind of an intense test taker. I don't mind taking tests. I kind of like them, but it's just, I get kind of wound up, and it kind of calms you down. And it reminds you that, hey, you know what? I'm ready for this. These are things I know. I am ready for this. And so it kind of gets you in a good mindset. So that's referred to as a brain dump. Does that make more sense? Anybody else have familiarity with the concept of a brain dump at all? Okay, I hope that makes sense. Yes. Oh goodness, yes. Okay, so all of the exams, and somebody's asking, is the exam multiple choice? So, and you know, we've had all these updates with all these PMI resources. I've kind of gotten away from some of those things. So yes, the PMP and the PBA are both 200 question, and the ACP is 120 questions. They're all multiple choice. All of PMI's tests are multiple choice. They are administered on a computer, and there are 4 mutually exclusive answers, meaning you're going to get a question and the answer is either going to be A or B or C or D. It's not going to be A and B but not C, or all of the above or none of the above. It's going to be A, B, C, or D. So you will get, for the PBA and the PMP, 4 hours to answer 200 questions. The ACP is 3 hours for 120 questions. I am 90% sure I got that right. So you can move through the test and you can go backwards and forwards. If you're on question 52 and you realize, ooh, I want to go back and change 13, you can do that. So you can mark a question. You can check a little box and it'll mark a question. You can go back and look at marked questions. When the time runs out, the time runs out. I don't hear about people running out of time, but you do have to keep moving. You are scored based on domain. So another reason those exam content outlines are helpful is because you are going to get a score for each domain. For example, the ECO for the PMP is organized by process group. The domains are initiate, plan, execute, monitor, control, and close. You will get scored on each of those. The ECO will tell you how many questions from the exam are going to pertain to each domain, and then you'll get a score. Your score will be proficient, moderately proficient, or below proficient. Proficient translates roughly to above average. Moderately proficient is average, and below proficient is below average. I can't tell you that you need to get at least 3 proficients or anything like that, because they're weighted differently, and it just matters. What matters is your overall score. So for example, the PMP, let's say you're going to get, maybe a moderately proficient in initiate and plan, a proficient in execute, a below proficient in monitoring and controlling, and a moderately proficient in closing. And you can pass. Somebody could get 3 below proficients and 2 proficients and pass. There isn't really a way to predict it. You'll get an exam report, which is actually considerably more helpful than it used to be, at the end. And the exam report is going to show you how you performed on each of the tasks from the ECO. So again, those exam content outline will be organized by these domains with these tasks, and you will get an exam report that will show you for each one of those tasks. Let's see, I was gonna just take a look here. Let's just take a look at an ECO. How about that? If you skip a question, will they show at the end of the exam to answer at that time? Yeah, so here's my thing on skipping questions. If you do not know the answer to a question, my recommendation would be to guess and mark it and note it on your scratch paper. I personally would not leave it blank, because if for some reason you forget to go back and answer it, you would get it wrong. It's not an adaptive test. I mean, if it's not answered, it's wrong. I would at least guess. But yes, it'll show you that it wasn't answered. Yeah, at the end, it'll show you any blanks or, what you have marked. But let's just take a look at, what should we look at? Let's look at the PMP. All right, so here we go. Certifications, PMP. Here's the exam content outline. So you're going to find the ECO. They are on the right margin for all of the tests. So here's the ECO. You can see that is dated June 25th. They update these about every 4 or 5 years, so I suspect we'll start hearing rumblings about this next year getting updated. So here is how the PMP exam is organized. These are the 5 domains. Here's the percentage of the questions from each domain. So if you take the PMP test, you're going to get 31% of your questions on executing, 24% on planning, initiating. And then, as I say, you'll get a score for each one of those domains. Proficient, moderately proficient, below proficient, above average, average, below average. So you could theoretically get proficient in executing and planning and below proficient on a couple others, but because those are, bigger chunks of the exam, depending on how far into the proficient or below proficient, there just isn't, you could pass. So it isn't, it's very hard to know. I can't tell you that, out of the 200, you need this many correct, or you need to get this many proficients. It just isn't, it doesn't, you can't do that. So here are the domains, and so here's domain 1, initiating. Here are these tasks that I've been talking about. So again, this is a blueprint for the exam. So they write questions, around these tasks. The other thing that's helpful about these ECOs is that when you submit your application, you have to identify, describe your experience. Use this to help you with verbiage around your experience. So, what did you do as part of initiating your projects? Well, here are the things that you might have been doing. So you can use some of this to help describe your projects. Same with the PBA, and that's really important, especially for hybrid PMBAs, PMs maybe who don't, have a hard time recognizing their BA experience. Use the PBA ECO exam content outline, those tasks, to help you with describing your experience. So this, you'll get then on your exam report, how did you do on task 1? You got maybe 2 of 3 questions, or, 8 of 10 or whatever. Exam 2, exam 3. Here's planning, and there are 13 tasks in planning. Okay. Now these do not align directly with a specific process or anything like that, but you can sort of see hints of them in there. Here's executing tasks. And here's monitoring, controlling, closing. Okay, and they all look like this, so really key document. Yeah, good questions. Other questions? Anything else? All right, well, again, good luck to all of you. Let me know if you've got anything else I can help you with, and I would love to help you, and Watermark would love to help you out with whatever certification goals you have. So it's been very nice to be with you here today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.